Hi, Nancy.
Welcome to episode 98 of the Front Porch Book Club.
The Front Porch Book Club is a podcast that meets twice a month.
We like to dig deep into the relationship between characters and the worlds they live in.
Grab your book and iced tea and join us on the front porch.
Well, Lenny, yesterday was your birthday. Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Did you do anything special for your birthday?
I had lunch with our parents.
Oh, nice.
That was it.
Was any cake eaten?
Yeah.
Excellent.
A small, respectable slice. And I didn't take the rest of the cake home. I said that with them.
Well, yes. Happy birthday. A day late. So for listeners who are ready to dig back into the mighty red and hear an expert or the author talk with us about it, we're going to switch things up a little bit. We're actually going to move on to our next book, The Storm We Made by Vanessa Chan, because we realized, perhaps we should have realized sooner, that our 100th episode is coming up in just 2 episodes.
Woohoo! Time to celebrate.
Time to celebrate. So what we decided to do is we're moving on to The Storm We Made. We'll have 2 episodes on that, and then we'll have our 100th episode.
Because we have to celebrate.
We really do.
Well, let's talk about this book. I really enjoyed it. The Storm We Made is based in part of the world our club hasn't visited yet.
Yeah.
It's Malaya. In 1945, in this novel, an ordinary housewife becomes an unlikely spy.
Ooh.
Her children are young, between 7 and 17 when we start out, and they try to survive the consequences of her deception.
Yeah.
The Storm We Made is one relatively few Western novels that tells a World War II story from the perspective of the colonized rather than the colonizer or the liberator. This book is an international bestseller, New York Times Editor's Choice, and was named Best Book of 2024 by Amazon, NPR, People, Elle, and Good Housekeeping, among others. It's been translated in over 20 languages already.
Yeah, just incredible success story. This is also Vanessa Chan's debut novel. Think of all of the success she's had with this, and this is her first published novel. So the book is told from the point of view of 4 characters. First, Cecily Alcantara. She is the dutiful housewife whose life changes when she meets the charming Englishman Bingley Chan. Next, we sometimes hear from Jujube. This is Cecily's oldest, brilliant daughter who works in a tea room to bring in money for the family after the Japanese invasion of Malaya. Previous to that, she'd been a student, but now the schoolhouse is closed and all the kids are working. Third point of view is Abel. This is Cecily's middle child who, on his 15th birthday, is kidnapped by the Japanese and sent to work at a brutal labor camp. And then finally, fourth, there's Jasmine, the youngest of Cecily's children, who is 7. She's just trying to make sense of her changed family and life. When done well, I really enjoy books that take readers into the thoughts of various characters. As a reader, you really get to understand the perspective of these different characters and feel why they behave the way they do. When done poorly, I think you're bought into a character and then suddenly you're in another character's head that you don't care about and you miss the character that now you're only seeing distantly. But I think Vanessa Chan does it very well. I think each time we switch into a different character's point of view, we're interested and happy to be back in that point of view to find out what's going on with what they're thinking. I was wondering, was there a point of view in the book that you found particularly compelling?
I found all their stories very interesting and compelling. The more I got into this book, the more my anxiety was building. And I wanted the kids to be okay.
I know.
And I wanted them to all get home And it's painstaking because you just didn't know, as I guess real life is, who's going to make it and who isn't.
Yeah.
So we're following their stories and what's happening in their world.
Yeah.
Was there a particular voice or person that you felt more compelled, or storyline?
I really was interested in Cecily, and I do think of her as the protagonist. So often the protagonist is a good person who is trying to make good decisions that you're rooting for. But in Cecily's case, she is such an interesting character because she full-heartedly becomes a spy for the Japanese and causes her country's demise, or at least aids in her country's demise. And she feels guilty throughout much of the book and feels that she has brought her family's and her country's woes to head from her actions. The way the book's written, that is partially true. She is credited with the northern by land invasion of Malaya. And that was factual, that the Japanese did invade by land, which surprised everyone. They thought for certain they would come by sea. And so they were unprepared for all these bicycle riding soldiers. This book attributes that brilliant tactic to her. So I just thought she was a fascinating character. Why she made the decisions that she did to become a spy and how she dealt with the guilt of that and then the grief. She was a character that is falling apart as the book goes along. And it was interesting to see her journey in that, I thought.
Right. Now, I didn't know a lot about this. I very interested in the Germany part of World War II and what was happening there. This Malaya is now Malaysia, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So I'm like looking this up on the map going, where is this? So I found that fascinating. I didn't realize that they were under British rule. One thing that I thought was interesting about this time was that they were ruled by the British, and part of what leads her to be a spy is that there is some prejudice against the people that live there.
Yeah.
They can only go up so high in the public service because they're not British.
Yeah.
And they don't look British. So there's a lot of classism and prejudice towards them. So that part is interesting. And then that leads her to think maybe it might be better if Japanese ruled us because at least they're Asian. They kind of look like us. Maybe it'll be okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it doesn't work out that way.
And the whole concept that Bingley Chan, who we find out later is actually Mr. Fujiwara, conveys to Cecily is Asia for Asians. So let's kick the British out and we will have Asia ruled by Asians, which will most certainly be an improvement. Unfortunately, doesn't turn out that way.
No, it turns out horribly because under the British rule, they had schools, they had jobs, they had food to eat.
Mm-hmm.
Society was safe, but it wasn't perfect. There was classism and racism and not opportunities for all, but it falls apart during the war.
Yeah. Here's a funny thing. In my In Real Life book club, we just read a book this month about the Bataan Death March that takes place on the Malayan Peninsula.
Oh.
That is written from the perspective of American soldiers who are stationed on the peninsula, then get caught up in the Bataan Death March. It's a very difficult book to read in terms of the torture and the atrocities that the American soldiers faced, but an excellent book. That book is called The Long March Home. It was co-written by Marcus Brotherton, who's well known in World War II nonfiction writing. He co-authored this with Tosca Lee, who is a well-known fiction author. So they joined together to write this fictional account, but inspired by true stories of the Bataan Death March. So I feel like I have been immersed in the world of the Pacific Theater during the past month.
Well, now that's an interesting perspective because I've heard of that, but I did not realize that that was this area. Oy.
Yeah. One of the things that this book also does structurally is it moves back and forth in time. So we are moving back to 10 years before the Japanese invasion and then to what is present time in the book, and that is 1945 as the war is coming to a close. And so 10 years earlier, Cecily meets Bingley Chan. She starts her career as a spy under his guidance. And then we see what's happening in real book time with her family. And although the war is coming to an end, there's time for some truly terrible things to happen to her family. For me, I liked that moving back in time because we are seeing the decisions that she made and then the consequences of those actions that added a lot of intrigue and even tension. Like, how would her work play out? Then she becomes romantically involved with Bingley Chan. What is going to happen there? So I thought it was very effectively done. This is not a new approach. We have read many books by now that have had that structure of moving back in time. I know sometimes you feel like they work and you like them. Other times you don't like the structure. What did you think about the structure of the book?
I didn't even think about that, Nance.
Really? So she did it very effectively.
I guess she did. I noticed that we were going back and forth. If I can follow the story, I'm happy. And I had no problem. There's a stark difference between what happens before the war and what life is like for them, and then how life disintegrates during the war. My only thought of it is once it gets so far, I just want those kids home. I don't want to read back about the other parts of the book. If I would have had a hard copy book, I probably would have just skipped those chapters and went right for getting those kids home and then go back and read the other things. It just was stressing me out.
That's good storytelling that she had you so tense.
I was upset, yeah. Well, let's start with Cecily here a little bit because she is, and it makes me think of our Parasite book, but she gets indoctrinated, basically. She accepts what Bingley says about Asians ruling Asians. No one has to teach her that they are oppressed under British rule.
Right.
There is racism. She knows very well that there are problems there. But she buys in to this idea that it might be better for Japan to come in and take over. Because she buys into this, then she becomes the spy and gets information to him that leads to Japan taking over. But she is very light-skinned, and one of her children is very light-skinned because at some point there's some British blood in them.
Portuguese.
Oh, Portuguese. Okay. So under the situation pre-war, because they're a little lighter skinned, they have sort of a higher ranking than if they would have been darker skinned. Now, when the Japanese take over, being lighter skinned isn't a good thing.
Right.
That means, oh, you got some European blood in you, and it flip-flops on her, and it flip-flops on the boy who is lighter.
Mm-hmm.
So you see some racism and what that does based on the pigment of your skin.
Yeah.
It's interesting from a classism and how things can flip-flop like that. Cecily's husband has climbed the ranks too. Pre-war, he is climbing up public works and he's got good pay and the family is mobilized in an upward position. The war takes place and now he is a laborer. Her actions, and this is a fiction book, lead to her country's demise. She never tells anybody what she did.
No. Isn't that amazing? She never divulges her role in the invasion.
No. Nance, did you think of our Parasite book when you thought about how she bought into the ideals of some guy and how that took her from This ordinary housewife, let's just say, she's raising 3 kids.
Right.
And she does this stuff because of this ideal that maybe things would be better if Japan ruled them.
Isn't that interesting? Because her life was creme de la creme in terms of Malayans.
Yeah.
She was getting invited to basically like the presidential palace. She was going to fancy parties. They had enough money to hire a housekeeper. She had a really good life. But you're right. She got ensnared by this propaganda. I think she was also ensnared by the idea of wanting more than being a housewife, though. I think that this idea of becoming a spy added a purpose and even maybe a sort of glamour to her life. She was dissatisfied as a housewife. In fact, somewhere very early in the book, she talks about she hated her children and she hated her husband. And she knows that's a terrible thing to say and no one would understand, but that's the truth.
Yeah, she was a bored housewife.
Yeah.
I don't know how you can be bored with 3 kids. Come on. But for whatever reason, she was seeking something else. And Bingley offered the affair.
Mm-hmm.
He offered this secret spying. And so it added interest in her life. And she was so ordinary looking and so unassuming that she could get away with all this.
Right. Well, and she mostly was just overhearing her husband's conversations with colleagues and digging through his wastebin and papers. This was not like she was going out on missions or anything. She was just taking advantage of the information that surrounded her. It does make me think when we think of the Parasite book and the infectious ideas, this infective idea of Asia for Asians was something that was popular in Malaya at the time. Of course, no one wants to be occupied by the British Empire. People want self-determination. And Japan sitting right there saying, well, hey, we'll help you guys out. And people like Cecily falls for this propaganda. But it does make me think, too, about what are the conditions of a person's life that make them vulnerable to propaganda. I do think that she was particularly vulnerable because of her dissatisfaction with her life. She was grasping for more in life, more meaning.
Right.
And she also wanted more for her children. So this isn't necessarily completely self-centered kind of thing. You always want more for your children. You want your children not to be held back by things they should not be held back by, like the color of their skin, their ethnic heritage, their religion, whatever. You want your children to be able to succeed in what they want to do based on their skills and abilities.
Yeah.
I liked her because she was a complicated character.
Yeah, I did like that part about the book too. She was very dimensional and her kids were dimensional too. Even Bingley's character is very dimensional. He is not black and white by any means. He has some principles and there's some parts of him that are great. And then there's some parts that are, what is he doing? Is he manipulating her? Yeah, he is. So his character is complicated too to wrestle around with. You kind of see that character change a little bit too, and she gives you more and more insight into him.
I thought he was really interesting too. I couldn't figure out, and I never really decided if Bingley or Mr. Fujiwara actually loves Cecily or basically he was a honey trap for her and he decided to become romantically involved because she was a reliable agent. And if she's willing, why not? But I don't think he felt for her the depth she felt for him, even though once they start an affair, she feels like she has all the power at that point. There are a lot of times when we're in her point of view, she's kind of saying, oh, men are so easy to figure out. I have him wrapped around my finger in some ways, but I think she was deluding herself. I think the whole time he was completely in control of that relationship.
I do too. He could come and go as he wanted. It was a secret affair.
Right.
He had total control for the most part when they would get together. She was at his beck and call. She might think she had the power, but I don't think she did. I think she was a little delusional. She certainly cared for him more than he cared for her. Yeah, he got something out of the affair. He got Japan to enter in, so that boosted his ratings because what he did led to Japan easily taking over the country.
Right.
So he got what he wanted, and he kept this housewife in the palm of his hand doing what he wanted her to do.
And if he really did have any feelings for her, I think when he came back and then basically moved into what was the presidential palace, he would have gone looking for her.
Right.
And he never does. He is living in the same city she is. And he must realize that she and her family are suffering terribly under Japanese rule, under his rule. But he never even lifts a finger to do anything to help them. So I think he was totally using her.
Yeah, unfortunately.
I did want to ask you what you thought about Cecily's friendship with Lena. So Lena becomes her best friend, but also is Bingley Chan's wife. Now, Lena doesn't know anything about Bingley actually being a Japanese spy whose name is really Fujiwara. Cecily is having an affair with him while Cecily is best friends and spending every other of her waking hours with Lena. They are very close friends. When Lena dies in childbirth, and this is Bingley Chan's child, Chan has by then disappeared. We know he's gone back to Japan to get ready for the invasion. Cecily promises to take care of the child, but she abandons it and tells the midwife, you take care of it. I don't want to have anything to do with it. So what did you think about that friendship?
Again, complicated, right?
Yeah.
Lena's more into this friendship than Cecily is, but Lena has a higher social status at some points because she's got Bingley. I get the impression that she wants to befriend Lena because she has a higher social status and she's connected to Bingley. Mm-hmm. But I don't know that it's any more than that.
Well, she says that she feels like they are so close. They share everything, except the fact, of course, that she's having an affair with her husband. They talk about everything. She's never felt so free. She hates it when it's time for Lena to go home.
That's right.
I mean, she just talks about wanting to live in a bubble with Lena and not have any other intrusions except for Bingley. She says she really enjoys her time with her. But again, I feel like Cecily is deluding herself. She clearly is able to compartmentalize that she's having an affair with this woman's husband, but she's deluding herself, I think, into what it means to be a friend. She is taking the cream of friendship, but she's not willing to put in the work when work is really required. There are a couple times she almost gives Lena up just because she doesn't like certain things. I think Cecily is a character who is pretty self-involved and really doesn't understand relationships.
And she's spending all this time with her, and she's not spending time with her own children.
Or her husband.
Again, she's searching for something. It'd be interesting to hear what other people think about her. I think she provides her with a distraction in life.
Yes.
The parties and the status and being close to Bingley in some ways.
Maybe you're right. She's like searching for something. So this gives her a focus. This gives her a purpose. She is Lena's friend.
Yeah. It's very strange.
And Cecily's relationship with her husband, Gordon, also very strange. She only lets him see a very superficial layer of who she is. She never really has any kind of intimate conversations with him about what she's feeling or thinking or doing. He, again, is just someone that she works her life around. She is not a partner of his in his life. And he seems like he's maybe a little pompous, but he seems like generally a nice guy. He's working really hard to support the family. He's worried when she faints at the party. You get the feeling that he is very fond of her and maybe loves her, but she is not interested in him at all.
She isn't really very attached to him or the children in some ways, but then she's really attached to this Bingley character. And then she spends a lot of time with Lena. She enjoys her, I guess, but I don't know. There's something about that that's not quite connected.
Would you say that Cecily is a user?
Well, I don't know if user's the right word. She's just grabbing at straws. I mean, there's a hollowness in her.
Yeah.
That wants to get filled up in some way. And she seems like she's trying to figure out how to fill herself up. And she is making mistakes along the way.
Yeah. And in a lot of fiction books, the main character would have a moment of catharsis or recognition. Maybe she would share her story. Man, not Cecily. She is going to take this story to the grave.
No, I thought she might raise Bingley's child because then she would have that connection with Bingley to say, it's during the war and your baby needs this or that. I think it's interesting that the baby's scarred in childbirth, since image and the way your skin is seems very important. Being scarred is not a great thing. I just wonder if the baby came out perfect, maybe she would have been more apt to take it in and raise the child as her own. But again, there's some kind of attachment issue going on there that she just doesn't do that. And this poor child ends up in a horrible situation during the war.
Yeah, she's at a comfort station providing sex to Japanese soldiers, and she's 7.
Horrifying.
The thing about Cecily is she is a unpredictable mother. She pushes Jujube and causes her to fall and hit her head on the concrete. She yells at her children. Part of this is the stress of the war, her own guilt, of course. There's reasons for this, in addition to, I think you're right, this attachment issue. But she is absolutely grief-stricken when Abel is taken away, when he disappears. They don't know what happened to him. And then Jasmine, the youngest, also disappears. She runs away at one point. So she is attached enough to her children that these two events cause her almost wild grief. And that is different than the way she interacts with them on a daily basis, though. So she does have some very deep motherly love for them, but I think she's a very difficult mother.
I don't ever doubt that she loves her children, but they don't fill her up. They're not enough. There's something inside of her that's not enough. She would be a difficult person for a child to have her as a mom.
Because ultimately she is pretty self-involved.
Yeah.
For her life really revolves around herself.
Yeah, and her drama.
So you said you liked the book overall?
Oh, yeah. I thought it was a very interesting part of history I didn't know anything about. I liked the way that it was structured. I liked seeing the war from different points of view with different experiences. Okay, so this is what a work camp is like. We always had a lot of, I think in history class, a lot of wars of, this is this march, or this is this strategy, or this is this kind of cannon. This is what's going on with the people that live there. How the schools are now closed. Nobody has enough to eat. How are the families doing? How has life changed in a war-struck country?
Mm-hmm.
Cecily thinks she's doing the right thing. She's thinking, I think it would be good for us to be under Japan's rule. I think this might be a good thing for us. And you see the relevance today. Like, people buy into certain ideas. They think something's going to be better if we make this change. And they believe it, and they can argue about it, but it may not turn out the way you think it's going to turn out. So it has relevance, I think, for today.
Boy, talk about swinging fortunes of all of the characters, because if you were high up in the British occupation, you were as good as dead. And then if you're high up in the Japanese occupation, like Mr. Fujiwara, he ultimately also comes to a bad end, of course, after the war is over. These changing loyalties and just trying to survive.
The oldest daughter, Jube, we didn't talk about her at all. So I just want to say I really liked her storyline. And I liked that they brought in somebody from Japan that was a nice guy, that loved his daughter, that was doing what he thought was the right thing to do. And I am so happy with how her storyline ended, because I was really stressed that something horrible was going to happen with her and she would make some really poor decisions that she would have to live with the rest of her life, partly because of probably the brain injury or the coma from her mom pushing her,
Yeah.
She just was having a really hard day. But she was an interesting person and another perspective that I thought was really good as the oldest daughter in that family.
Yeah, the oldest daughter who really had to shoulder a lot of the family responsibilities because her mom was
checked out.
Dad is super sick
and working all the time.
She had a lot of resilience, though. You have the feeling that she is going to come out of this as whole as anyone else in her family.
Yeah.
She will be able to move forward. She will probably end up supporting her family. She'll be able to help her brother work through lots and lots of issues he's going to need to work through.
I hope she gets out of town and she gets away from her mom. She's put up with enough grief from her mother and her family. That's not your job. She needs a couple of months of rest, maybe a year. But then I would hope that she would finish school and then really just spread her wings. And she has the capability of making something really positive happen for herself.
When you think about this kind of mass trauma, what impact does that even have on a whole country?
Yeah, it's horrible, isn't it? It would take them a while.
I think about Ukraine. I think about other countries that have had war and this kind of mass trauma. And you think, I hope everyone gets some mental health.
Trauma is different for everybody.
Okay.
And so there's some people who, like you can see this older daughter, Jujube, and she's going to make it. She's got enough grit and drive and cognitive stability to be able to do it. It's not the amount of trauma. It can be the amount of trauma, but there's something inside some people that are more resilient. Whereas other people, maybe the trauma doesn't come to them. It's more secondary, like in Cecily's case. She's not kidnapped. She has food in her belly. She doesn't need an education. She already had it. But she is traumatized by what's happening to those around her. She might not recover, right? The decisions that she's made and what she's gone through have had a horrible effect on her. And the way she perceives this as she did a bad act, so now bad things are going to come to her. And we didn't really talk about that ideology that she has. And that is going to keep her probably down and keep her feeling guilty and not allowing her to be able to move away from that like some people will. So trauma is tricky because everybody handles that kind of stuff differently. I remember just talking to a lot of people in a lot of different situations, and it's such a personalized story of how people grow out of it and how quickly it happens and what they need to do it. It's hard to predict, but in the story, you can see that some people are going to make out better than others.
In the introduction to the book, there's a Dear Kind Reader letter written by Vanessa, and she talks about being interested in this time period and her grandmother would have been a teenager at the time of World War II. And she would ask questions, and they mostly said, "Don't be nosy," and "No one talks of those times." That is, I guess, another way to deal with trauma.
Right. And for some people, that might be helpful, but not for everybody.
Yeah.
Because they need to talk about it. They need to process it different. Some people are able to move ahead easier. I just think everybody is so different.
Okay.
And you just need to allow flexibility for people to be able to move ahead how they can.
I'm glad that we both enjoyed this book. It just felt like a very different kind of book. I have not read up until this month any books set in Malaya. Now I've read 2 this month. I really am happy that I read those 2 the same month, almost as different perspectives on what was happening in that part of the world. Like you said, we mostly hear about the European theater in books about World War II. We don't hear as much about the Pacific theater, and certainly not Malaya.
Right. Thanks, everybody, for stopping by the front porch.
Our website is frontporchbookclub.com.
Our episodes come out twice a month on the first and third Wednesday of each month.
See you next time, Lenny.
See you, Nance.